As of September 2024, the US presidential race is in full swing, and it is shaping up to be a highly contentious election between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Both candidates are locked in a tight race, with national polls showing them neck and neck. Though Harris has pulled slightly ahead in some recent surveys, Trump continues to be a dominant figure within the Republican Party, maintaining a solid base of support, especially among conservative voters who align with his populist message. However, this latest presidential race didn't begin as Harris versus Trump. Earlier in 2024, President Joe Biden's decision to step out of the presidential race marked a significant turning point in American politics. This unexpected move, announced earlier in the year, followed months of speculation about his age, health, and ability to secure another term. Biden, who was 81 at the time of his decision, faced increasing scrutiny over his cognitive skills, and many within the Democratic Party were growing concerned about the implications of running the oldest sitting president in U.S. history for re-election. Despite his administration's significant achievements, such as managing the post-pandemic economic recovery, signing massive infrastructure and climate change legislation, and re-establishing alliances on the global stage, Biden's decision was deeply personal. In his statement, he emphasized the need for a new generation of leaders to build on the progress he had made. Biden framed his decision as one rooted in responsibility to the party and the nation, stating that he wanted to ensure Democrats had the best chance of retaining the White House in 2024. His steady leadership broadly defines Biden's legacy through turbulent times. He came into office at a moment of national crisis, facing the COVID-19 pandemic, a fractured economy, and deep political polarization. His administration managed to oversee a significant economic recovery, record low unemployment rates, and landmark legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act to address climate change and boost domestic manufacturing. However, his approval ratings were often weighed down by concerns about inflation, rising living costs, and the perception that the Biden administration struggled to communicate its successes to the broader public. These issues created challenges for the Democratic Party heading into the 2024 election. Biden faced mounting pressure from both within his party and from the media to reconsider his candidacy. Concerns about his age were central to these discussions, particularly following several high-profile instances where he appeared to struggle during public speaking engagements and several stumbles during official appearances. His physical and mental health became a key talking point for political opponents, and even some Democratic allies quietly questioned whether Biden, who would be 86 at the end of his second term, could endure the rigors of the presidency for another 4 years. Progressives and younger Democrats were also becoming increasingly vocal about the need for fresh leadership. Figures such as Vice President Kamala Harris and others like Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer were seen as potential heirs to the Democratic mantle, representing a new generation of leaders who could energize the party's base and appeal to younger voters. On the other side, Republicans capitalized on Biden's vulnerabilities, with former President Donald Trump, who had already declared his candidacy for 2024, repeatedly questioning Biden's fitness for office. Trump's relentless attacks and a polarized media environment created a pressure cooker atmosphere for Biden as he weighed the decision to continue his run for a second term. With Biden stepping aside, attention quickly shifted to Vice President Kamala Harris. As the sitting vice president, Harris became the de facto frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. Her potential candidacy presented a historic opportunity for Democrats to nominate the first female president and the first president of Black and South Asian descent. Harris's record as vice president was under scrutiny, as she had often been assigned complex tasks like managing the southern border crisis and overseeing voting rights initiatives. Critics had long argued that she struggled to define her role within the Biden administration and had yet to develop a strong political identity outside of being Biden's running mate. Nonetheless, her high-profile position, coupled with a deep connection to the Democratic base, made her a strong candidate. However, Harris was one of many positioned to step into the spotlight. Governors like Gavin Newsom of California and Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan were seen as potential challengers, each with their own appeal. Newsom had garnered national attention for his progressive policies in California and his willingness to take on Republican governors like Ron DeSantis. Whitmer, known for her pragmatic leadership and handling of the COVID-19 pandemic in Michigan, represented a more centrist option for Democrats. The impact on the Democratic primary Biden's exit created a vacuum that set the stage for a potentially contentious Democratic primary. While many party leaders rallied behind Harris, she wasn't guaranteed to avoid a primary challenge. Though older, progressive leaders like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren still had a significant influence on the party. Additionally, figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represented a new wave of progressive leadership, though she had yet to officially indicate an interest in running. The primary race also posed the question of whether Democrats would unite behind a single candidate or see a fractured contest that could weaken the party's chances in the general election. Some political observers speculated that Biden's decision to step aside was in part to avoid the risk of a divisive primary, as it became more apparent that the party needed to consolidate behind a fresh candidate with broad appeal. From the Republican side, Biden's decision had significant strategic implications. Donald Trump, who remained the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, had built much of his campaign strategy around running against Biden, framing the election as a rematch of 2020. With Biden out of the picture, Trump's campaign was forced to pivot, possibly facing a younger and more dynamic opponent like Harris or another Democratic leader. Furthermore, Biden's departure from the race altered the tone of the general election. Republicans had consistently attacked Biden's record and his age, but a younger Democratic nominee might challenge the GOP's messaging. For Republicans, Biden stepping down also reinforced their own conversations about leadership transition, as figures like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley pushed for the GOP to move beyond Trump. President Biden's decision to drop out of the 2024 race was a dramatic shift in the political landscape. It signaled the end of an era for a leader who had spent decades in public service and shepherded the nation through challenging times. His decision opened the door for a new generation of Democratic leaders while reshaping the dynamics of the 2024 election. Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, is working to consolidate her base, particularly among progressives and minority voters. However, she faces challenges in differentiating her platform from the administration of President Joe Biden, particularly on economic issues where inflation and economic anxiety remain high concerns for voters. Harris has also emphasized her stance on social issues, including reproductive rights and climate change, aiming to galvanize the Democratic electorate. Harris, who has emerged from the Democratic primary, focuses on issues such as reproductive rights, climate change, and economic inequality. Trump, representing the Republican Party, continues to push a populist agenda, emphasizing immigration reform, deregulation, and tax cuts. Harris has taken a stance to maintain continuity with many of the policies of the Biden administration, especially in areas like healthcare expansion, environmental protection, and labor rights. However, she is also trying to establish a distinct identity, distancing herself on issues like the economy, where she has criticized some aspects of Biden's handling of inflation. One of her key messages is focused on expanding healthcare access through the Affordable Care Act and pushing forward on climate change initiatives like renewable energy infrastructure and green job creation. During the campaign, Harris has continued to secure strong support from women, young voters, and minority groups, key components of the Democratic base. She has particularly targeted suburban areas and battleground states, emphasizing her pro-choice stance and environmental record. Harris's focus on reproductive rights has intensified following the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, making this a central issue in her platform. Trump's campaign is driven by a return to what he describes as America First policies, promising to undo much of what the Biden administration has implemented. His messaging continues to focus on themes of economic revitalization through tax cuts, bolstering national security, and combating illegal immigration. Trump remains formidable, drawing large crowds to his rallies and maintaining loyalty among conservative voters, particularly in rural areas and red states. Despite ongoing legal challenges, including multiple indictments, Trump has framed himself as a fighter against what he calls a corrupt establishment, which continues to resonate with many in his base. He is also critical of the current administration's handling of foreign policy, especially on issues like China, immigration, and global trade. Trump's campaign has seen him doubling down on nationalism, economic deregulation, and conservative cultural values, particularly on issues like LGBTQ+ rights and school curricula. Although the two major parties largely define the race, third-party candidates such as Green Party's Jill Stein and Libertarian Chase Oliver are also in the race. While they are unlikely to win significant support, they could siphon off votes from Harris or Trump, potentially influencing the outcome in key states. Their presence introduces issues like environmental activism, civil liberties, and critiques of the current two-party system into the broader election discourse. Trump and Harris have focused heavily on economic issues, but their approaches differ. Trump advocates for lowering taxes, deregulation, and restoring domestic manufacturing jobs. Donald Trump's 2024 tax plan, which he has unveiled as a centerpiece of his campaign, is built on many of the same principles that guided his 2017 tax overhaul. That tax reform, known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the TCJA, was a hallmark of his presidency, reducing the corporate tax rate and providing temporary tax relief for individuals. Trump's new tax plan aims to expand on those policies with even deeper cuts, particularly for businesses, and to restructure the income tax brackets for individuals to create what he calls a supercharged economy. Trump's new tax plan significantly emphasizes cutting corporate taxes further, aiming to reduce the current corporate tax rate from 21% established under his 2017 reforms to as low as 15%. His argument centers on the idea that reducing the corporate tax burden will spur job creation, drive investment, and make the US more competitive globally. According to Trump, lowering the corporate tax rate will allow American companies to invest in domestic operations, increase worker wages, and reduce the incentive to move jobs and profits offshore. Critics argue that further corporate tax cuts disproportionately benefit wealthy businesses and shareholders rather than middle-class workers. They also note that the promised wage increases from Trump's previous tax cuts never materialized as expected. Instead, corporations used much of the windfall to buy back shares and increase dividends to investors, a trend that opponents argue would likely continue with another round of corporate tax reductions. Trump's 2024 tax plan proposes significantly restructuring the individual income tax brackets. His plan further simplifies the tax code by consolidating the 7 current income tax brackets into 3. Under this proposal, the top marginal tax rate would be reduced from 37% to 33%. Trump argues that this will provide significant relief for higher income earners and help spur overall economic activity by increasing disposable income. Additionally, Trump has expressed interest in raising the standard deduction again, reducing taxable income for many Americans, and simplifying the filing process. This expansion would build on the 2017 TCJA, which nearly doubled the standard deduction and aims to relieve low and middle-income families. This change will allow more households to avoid itemizing deductions and take a larger flat reduction in their taxable income. Trump's plan suggests further rate reductions for middle-income brackets, although the specifics of where the tax brackets would be set have yet to be fully detailed. The Trump campaign argues that these cuts will stimulate consumer spending, drive economic growth, and improve many Americans' living standards. A crucial part of Trump's new tax plan is the repeal of the estate tax and a significant overhaul of capital gains taxes. The estate tax, sometimes called the death tax, currently applies to estates valued at over $12.92 million as of 2024. Trump's plan would eliminate this tax entirely, which he says will help family-owned businesses and farms by allowing wealth to be passed down without heavy tax penalties. The estate tax has long been contentious, with Republicans arguing that it punishes success and discourages wealth accumulation. At the same time, Democrats contend that it only affects the wealthiest Americans and is a key tool for ensuring that the ultra-wealthy contribute their fair share. Repealing the estate tax would likely be popular among wealthy Republican donors, but it faces strong opposition from Democrats who argue that it increases wealth inequality. On capital gains taxes, Trump has proposed lowering the rate for long-term capital gains and possibly indexing them to inflation. Long-term capital gains for high earners are taxed at a rate of 20%, with an additional 3.8% surtax for net investment income. Lowering these rates, Trump argues, will incentivize investment in the stock market, real estate, and other asset classes, driving economic growth. However, opponents argue that such changes primarily benefit wealthy investors and do little to help average Americans, who derive most of their income from wages, not investments. Trump's tax plan also includes targeted breaks for key industries that he views as critical to American economic strength. Among these, energy companies, particularly in fossil fuels, stand to benefit from Trump's pro-business, anti-regulation stance. His plan proposes expanded tax incentives for oil, natural gas, and coal production alongside reducing regulations that he believes hamper energy independence. Additionally, Trump's plan includes tax incentives for manufacturing, mainly aimed at bringing production back to the United States. He has long been a proponent of reducing America's reliance on foreign production, especially in China, and his tax plan seeks to create a more favorable environment for domestic manufacturers through tax breaks and incentives. Trump has marketed his tax plan as a catalyst for unprecedented economic growth. He predicts the cuts will pay for themselves by generating increased economic activity, higher wages, and greater corporate profits. This trickle-down approach, which assumes that benefits provided to businesses and wealthy individuals will lead to broader economic gains, is a central tenet of Trump's financial philosophy. However, many economists warn that such significant tax cuts, especially on the corporate side, could dramatically increase the federal deficit. The 2017 tax cuts already contributed to a sharp rise in the national debt, and further reductions could exacerbate this trend unless paired with substantial spending cuts, which Trump has not detailed. Critics argue that these cuts could undermine critical social services and increase the financial burden on future generations without clear plans to offset the lost revenue. Kamala Harris's 2024 tax plan primarily focuses on raising taxes on wealthy individuals and large corporations while offering significant tax relief and support to middle-class and lower-income families. The plan builds upon her long-standing advocacy for tax reform to reduce income inequality, expand economic opportunities for families, and support essential social programs. Harris supports raising taxes on America's wealthiest individuals. This includes increasing the top individual income tax rate from 37% to 39.6% for those earning over $400,000 per year. This proposal aligns with President Biden's current policy and aims to make the wealthiest Americans contribute more to public revenues, taxing unrealized capital gains for high net worth individuals. Harris advocates for a minimum 25% tax on unrealized capital gains for those with more than $100 million in wealth. This targets investors who earn substantial wealth from stock and real estate holdings without realizing income through sales. Raising the capital gains tax rate to align it with ordinary income rates for individuals earning over $1 million annually from investments would increase the rate from the current 20% to 28%. She also supports raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, reversing part of the 2017 tax cuts enacted under President Trump. This increase is intended to generate more revenue from large corporations, ensuring they contribute a fairer share of the tax burden. Raising the minimum tax on large corporations to 21%, up from the current 15%, will prevent companies from using loopholes and tax credits to reduce their taxable income. Harris also supports increasing the tax on corporate stock buybacks from 1% to 4%. This measure is designed to discourage companies from using their profits to buy back stock rather than reinvesting in the business or increasing wages. A major theme in Harris's plan is providing tax relief for middle-class families. Harris supports permanently extending the expanded child tax credit introduced in the American Rescue Plan. The plan would offer up to $6,000 per child for the first year of life, providing critical financial support to families with young children. She advocates for a permanent extension of the enhanced expansion of the child tax credit for workers without children, providing tax relief to a larger group of low-income earners. Harris proposes a $25,000 tax credit for first-time homebuyers spread over 4 years to support homeownership. This initiative is aimed at helping families enter the housing market during a time of rising prices. Harris's tax plan also addresses economic inequality through specific tax provisions. Harris has proposed eliminating federal income taxes on tips for workers in industries where tipping is customary, such as hospitality and service. This measure, however, would apply only to workers earning less than $75,000 annually to prevent higher-income individuals from taking undue advantage. For high-income earners with large IRA balances, Harris proposes limiting further contributions to these accounts, preventing the wealthiest from excessively sheltering income from taxes. Harris is likely to continue the Biden administration's push to reduce tax incentives for fossil fuel production, while offering new incentives for renewable energy and green initiatives. This would be part of her broader climate agenda. Harris has proposed tax credits and incentives to encourage affordable housing development. This includes offering builders tax breaks for creating starter homes for first-time buyers and expanding tax credits for affordable rental housing. Harris's tax plan aims to raise substantial revenue, which would be used to fund social programs such as education, childcare, and healthcare. Some estimates suggest that these tax measures, particularly on corporations and high earners, could raise more than $5 trillion over a decade, reducing the federal deficit by $1 trillion during that period. However, economists have projected that some aspects of the tax plan, particularly the corporate tax increases, could hurt long-term economic growth. For instance, raising the corporate tax rate could reduce GDP by around 2%, with corresponding reductions in wages and job growth. Kamala Harris's 2024 tax plan reflects her broader goals of reducing income inequality and bolstering middle-class prosperity through targeted tax relief, while increasing the tax burden on the wealthiest individuals and large corporations. While her policies could provide much-needed relief to millions of American families, they also carry potential economic trade-offs, particularly in terms of corporate behavior and investment. The impact of these policies will largely depend on how they are implemented and the balance of political power following the election. Healthcare is another pivotal issue, with Harris aiming to expand access through initiatives like public options under the Affordable Care Act. Kamala Harris's 2024 healthcare plan builds upon her long-standing advocacy for expanded access to healthcare, a focus on affordability, and significant reforms to reduce medical debt. Central to her approach is continuing the Biden administration's work on lowering healthcare costs, improving access to essential services, and addressing systemic issues within the U.S. healthcare system. A cornerstone of Harris's healthcare agenda is making healthcare more affordable and accessible, particularly for low-income and middle-class Americans. Harris has consistently supported the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, aiming to enhance its reach and affordability. Her 2024 plan includes expanding Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices, a policy that is expected to save Medicare beneficiaries and taxpayers billions. By 2026, negotiated prices for 10 of the most common and costly drugs, including medications for diabetes and heart disease, will save seniors an estimated $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket costs. In addition to lowering drug prices, Harris backs expanding subsidies for ACA marketplace plans to make health insurance more affordable for uninsured or underinsured. This builds on the existing provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has already helped reduce premiums and out-of-pocket costs for millions of Americans. Harris's plan addresses one of the most burdensome aspects of healthcare in America: medical debt. She has proposed several measures to eliminate or reduce medical debt for millions of Americans. Her administration pushes states and local governments to leverage public funds to purchase and eliminate medical debt. This strategy, pioneered under the American Rescue Plan, has already resulted in significant debt relief in various states. Harris's plan expands these efforts, aiming to cancel billions of dollars in medical debt for those affected, particularly low-income and vulnerable populations. Additionally, Harris supports removing medical debt from credit reports, a move that would improve the financial well-being of millions of Americans. This initiative reflects her broader commitment to protecting consumers from aggressive medical debt collection practices, which can have long-lasting economic consequences. As Vice President, Harris has supported efforts to empower Medicare to negotiate drug prices, an issue central to her healthcare plan. Under her 2024 agenda, she aims to strengthen these measures further, expanding Medicare's power to negotiate drug prices for more medications beyond the initial 10 drugs. The projected savings from this program are significant, with Medicare beneficiaries expected to see reduced costs for essential medicines like those used for diabetes and heart disease. Harris has emphasized the need for better access to mental health services and maternal care, particularly in underserved communities. The Biden-Harris administration expanded access to telehealth services during the pandemic, and Harris aims to maintain and broaden this access, ensuring that mental health services remain accessible across the country. Harris has also led efforts to address the maternal health crisis, with a focus on reducing maternal mortality rates and improving maternal mental health services. This initiative includes expanding access to care for pregnant women, especially those from marginalized communities, and strengthening healthcare systems to serve maternal health needs better. While Harris has previously supported a Medicare for all approach, she has moderated her stance in recent years. Her current platform does not aim to replace private insurance outright, but focuses on expanding coverage and making healthcare more affordable within the current system. This includes supporting policies that allow Americans to choose between public and private options, while ensuring that public options like Medicare are stronger and more accessible. Harris's healthcare plan for seniors includes improving long-term care options and ensuring that Medicare covers more services. Her administration introduced new rules for Medicare Advantage plans designed to protect patients from excessive prior authorization requirements and misleading marketing practices. Harris also supports new staffing requirements for Medicare-certified nursing facilities to improve the quality of care in long-term care settings. Kamala Harris's 2024 healthcare plan is a comprehensive approach to improving affordability, expanding access, and tackling the systemic issues of medical debt and drug pricing. By focusing on the continuation of ACA expansions, Medicare drug price negotiations, and protections against medical debt, Harris seeks to build a more equitable healthcare system. While her plan offers a significant increase in government involvement in healthcare, it stops short of the full-scale single-payer system she once advocated, instead offering a balanced approach that integrates both public and private options to provide more choices and lower costs for all Americans. At the same time, Trump continues to criticize these programs as burdensome to taxpayers, advocating for a more market-driven approach. His 2024 healthcare plan remains somewhat vague, but builds upon his administration's previous healthcare policies, especially his efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Trump has consistently criticized the ACA, calling it lousy, and has vowed to develop a much better healthcare system if re-elected, although specific details are scarce at this stage of his campaign. One of Trump's central healthcare goals is to replace the ACA, which he attempted to dismantle during his presidency. His administration reduced the ACA's effectiveness by repealing the individual mandate penalty, cutting funding for outreach, and expanding short-term insurance plans that do not cover pre-existing conditions. Despite these efforts, the ACA remains largely intact due to unsuccessful repeal attempts in Congress, including a famous vote where Senator John McCain opposed the repeal. In his 2024 campaign, Trump has reiterated his dissatisfaction with the ACA, stating that it needs to be replaced with a more affordable system. While he has not presented a concrete replacement plan, he has floated the idea of providing block grants to states to allow them more flexibility in administering Medicaid. One notable approach Trump has consistently advocated for is the expansion of short-term health insurance plans, which typically offer lower premiums but exclude coverage for pre-existing conditions and essential health benefits like maternity care. This was a significant part of his healthcare policy during his presidency, and he is likely to continue promoting these plans as a low-cost alternative to ACA-compliant insurance. Additionally, Trump has emphasized the need to reduce healthcare regulations and empower states to make their own decisions about healthcare coverage. This would include allowing states to apply for waivers to bypass specific ACA regulations, giving them more control over Medicaid and private insurance markets. Trump has spotlighted high prescription drug prices as a major issue. While his administration did not achieve significant changes in drug pricing, it made attempts to cap insulin prices for some Medicare beneficiaries and proposed linking Medicare drug prices to lower prices paid in other countries, a plan that was blocked in court. Trump has vowed to continue focusing on reducing drug prices in his 2024 campaign, though specific new policies have not been clearly defined. Trump also supports reforms to Medicare, which could include allowing private insurers more flexibility in offering Medicare Advantage plans and reducing federal spending on the program. However, his critics argue that his past proposals would lead to cuts in Medicare and Medicaid, affecting millions of seniors and low-income individuals. A key aspect of Trump's healthcare policy is his opposition to federal funding for abortion services. His administration removed funding from Planned Parenthood and other family planning clinics that provide or refer for abortions, and he has appointed conservative judges who played a pivotal role in overturning Roe v. Wade. In 2024, Trump is expected to continue advocating for states to have control over abortion laws, pushing for further restrictions on reproductive health services. A recent development tied to Trump's healthcare platform is Project 2025, a conservative initiative outlining a roadmap for dismantling federal healthcare programs and increasing privatization. Project 2025 was born out of frustration with the conservative movement's inability to fully capitalize on previous opportunities to reshape the federal government, particularly during the Trump administration. Though significant changes were made under President Trump, such as cutting taxes and rolling back regulations, many conservatives felt that the federal bureaucracy remained largely untouched. This sentiment is echoed in the project's goal of building a government staffed by conservatives prepared to reform the federal government's role. The initiative aims to influence the future administration starting from day one by creating a well-prepared pipeline of conservative officials ready to take over leadership positions in various federal agencies. According to the Heritage Foundation, the plan involves drafting policy proposals and training thousands of potential appointees to implement these ideas if a conservative president wins the White House in 2024. Project 2025 spans several policy domains, emphasizing downsizing the federal government and transferring more power to states and private entities. One of the most ambitious aspects of Project 2025 is overhauling the American healthcare system. The plan advocates for dismantling the Affordable Care Act and introducing more privatization into the healthcare sector. By reducing federal involvement, Project 2025 envisions a system where states have more authority over healthcare policy and individuals rely on private insurance plans. The agenda includes scaling back Medicare and Medicaid, turning these programs into block grants to states, and giving states greater leeway in deciding how to allocate these funds. Supporters argue that this approach would cut federal spending, reduce taxes, and create a more efficient, market-based system. However, critics warn that such changes could lead to reduced coverage for vulnerable populations, including seniors and low-income individuals, and potentially result in millions losing access to affordable care. Project 2025 includes ambitious plans for rolling back environmental regulations, particularly those related to climate change and clean energy. The plan calls for eliminating the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate carbon emissions, withdrawing from international climate agreements like the Paris Accord, and halting efforts to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Instead, Project 2025 advocates for a renewed focus on energy independence through increased domestic oil, coal, and natural gas production. Proponents argue that this approach would reduce energy costs and strengthen the U.S. economy by promoting job creation in the energy sector. Critics, however, argue that these policies would have disastrous consequences for the environment and the global fight against climate change. Education is another key component of Project 2025, which aims to reduce the federal government's role in public education. The initiative advocates for school choice, promoting the use of vouchers and other mechanisms that allow parents to send their children to private schools using public funds. Additionally, it supports reducing the power of the Department of Education and transferring more control to local governments and states. This push for school choice aligns with long-standing conservative values prioritizing parental control over education, and the belief that competition among schools will lead to higher standards. Critics argue that this could drain resources from public schools and exacerbate inequality, particularly in low-income communities. A significant part of Project 2025's agenda aims to reduce the size and scope of the federal bureaucracy. The project calls for slashing the number of federal employees, reducing regulations across various agencies, and restructuring or eliminating certain government departments that conservatives believe are unnecessary. One of the key targets is the Department of Education, which the plan suggests could be eliminated or drastically reduced in size. Proponents argue that these reforms would reduce government overreach, cut unnecessary spending, and return power to the states and private sector. Opponents, however, caution that such changes could lead to a lack of accountability and oversight, potentially resulting in negative outcomes for public services like healthcare, education, and environmental protection. To ensure the success of this agenda, Project 2025 emphasizes training a new generation of conservative leaders. This includes preparing thousands of potential appointees to fill key roles in federal agencies, where they can implement the policy changes proposed in the project. By creating a pipeline of conservative professionals ready to step into leadership positions, the initiative hopes to avoid the mistakes of previous Republican administrations, which often struggled to control the federal bureaucracy. Project 2025's comprehensive strategy includes legal challenges to existing regulations, lobbying for legislative changes, and utilizing executive powers to reverse policies from previous administrations. The Heritage Foundation and its allies have already begun mobilizing resources and gathering support for the initiative ahead of the 2024 presidential election. Project 2025 represents an ambitious vision for the future of American governance, driven by a conservative desire to limit the federal government's role and return power to states and individuals. while its proponents believe it will lead to greater efficiency, lower taxes, and more personal freedom. Its critics warn of the potential risks to public services, environmental protections, and healthcare access. The outcome of the 2024 election will likely determine whether this radical reformation becomes a reality. While Trump's 2024 healthcare plan lacks detailed policy specifics, it is clear that he intends to continue his efforts to repeal the ACA, expand short-term health plans, reduce federal regulations, and lower drug prices. However, many of these proposals, such as Medicaid block grants and Medicare reforms, could result in reduced federal healthcare spending and coverage. His emphasis on deregulation and privatization, along with his opposition to reproductive health services, marks a stark contrast to the healthcare policies of his likely Democratic opponents, who are focused on expanding government-funded healthcare and strengthening the ACA as the 2024 election approaches. More specific details of Trump's healthcare plan may emerge, providing voters with a clearer picture of his vision for the future of American healthcare. Harris and Trump also diverged significantly on foreign policy. Harris leans towards multilateralism, emphasizing alliances such as NATO and cooperation on global issues like climate change. Kamala Harris's foreign policy in the 2024 presidential campaign builds on her experiences as vice president under Joe Biden and as a former senator on the Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees. Her approach is centered on multilateralism, strengthening global alliances, particularly NATO, and addressing pressing global challenges such as climate change, geopolitical tensions with China and Russia, and the defense of democracy worldwide. Harris has positioned herself as a strong advocate for multilateral cooperation. She has consistently supported NATO and emphasized the importance of the alliance in the global fight against authoritarianism. As vice president, she represented the United States at key global events, such as the Munich Security Conference, where she reaffirmed America's commitment to NATO and its support for Ukraine in the ongoing war with Russia. Harris has stated that U.S. backing for Ukraine will continue for as long as it takes, and she has harshly criticized Russian aggression, pledging to hold Russia accountable for war crimes committed during the conflict. This stance aligns closely with the current administration's policies, continuing to strengthen U.S. ties with European allies. In addition to her support for NATO, Harris has been involved in efforts to expand the alliance. She supported the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, which was seen as a direct response to Russian aggression. This move is part of a broader strategy to strengthen the transatlantic alliance and deter future European conflicts. Harris's foreign policy also emphasizes strategic competition with China, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. The Biden-Harris administration developed an updated Indo-Pacific strategy to counter China's influence and ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. As part of this effort, the U.S. has strengthened alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia through the AUKUS Trilateral Security Pact, which includes plans to provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. Harris supports holding China accountable for human rights violations, particularly in regions like Xinjiang, while also recognizing the need to collaborate with Beijing on global issues like climate change and health. Her administration would likely continue the current U.S. stance of engaging with China on critical transnational issues while maintaining a firm position on economic and security challenges. Harris views climate change as one of the most pressing global threats and has made it a key element of her foreign policy agenda. As vice president, she voted to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, representing the largest climate investment in U.S. history. Harris has also supported the U.S. rejoining the Paris Agreement and has pledged billions to the UN Green Climate Fund, which helps developing countries tackle the effects of climate change. A 2024 campaign stresses the need for international cooperation to combat the climate crisis, framing it as both an environmental and a security issue. Harris has called for ambitious goals to achieve net zero emissions, building on Biden's efforts to invest in clean energy and reduce global carbon footprints. In the Middle East, Harris supports a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a position she has maintained since her time in the Senate. She has also backed the Abraham Accords, which have helped normalize relations between Israel and several Arab nations. However, Harris has signaled that her administration would adopt a more balanced approach, encouraging Israel to curb settlement expansion while also supporting Israel's security. She has expressed concern over the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the West Bank, indicating that her administration might take a stronger stance on protecting Palestinian rights. The COVID-19 pandemic brought global health to the forefront of U.S. foreign policy, and Harris has emphasized the need for improved global health security. As Vice President, she supported initiatives to strengthen global pandemic preparedness and response. Her administration would likely continue efforts to reform international health organizations, ensuring that the world is better equipped to handle future pandemics. Kamala Harris's 2024 foreign policy agenda represents continuity with many of the Biden administration's key international priorities, such as supporting NATO, addressing climate change, and countering authoritarianism. However, her approach is also shaped by her own experiences and growing leadership in international affairs. Her policies emphasize multilateralism, global cooperation, and holding adversaries accountable, while ensuring that the U.S. remains engaged in key regions like Europe and the Indo-Pacific. As the campaign progresses, her foreign policy platform is expected to continue reflecting a combination of traditional democratic priorities and responses to evolving global challenges. Trump, by contrast, emphasizes an America First policy, prioritizing national interests over global commitments, particularly in trade and defense. Donald Trump's 2024 foreign policy builds on his America First philosophy, prioritizing national interests, economic protectionism, and a more unilateral approach to global affairs. If re-elected, Trump's foreign policy is expected to continue and escalate the policies from his first term, which emphasized reshaping global alliances, reducing international military engagements, and confronting key adversaries like China and Iran. His approach also promises to create tension with traditional U.S. allies, as he often criticized multilateralism and global institutions. Trump's criticism of NATO and other multilateral institutions was a hallmark of his first term, which is likely to continue. He has repeatedly stated that NATO allies must pay their fair share of defense costs, often threatening to reduce U.S. support for the alliance if European countries do not meet their spending commitments. During his 2017 presidency, Trump publicly questioned whether the U.S. would defend allies who failed to meet the alliance's financial requirements. His stance creates uncertainty about the future of NATO, especially concerning collective security commitments. A second Trump presidency could see further re-evaluation of NATO's role, with the possibility of the U.S. stepping back from its leadership in the alliance, which would strain relations with European allies. This would reflect Trump's broader skepticism toward long-standing global institutions that he perceives as burdensome or unbeneficial to American interests. One of Trump's most controversial foreign policy positions concerns the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Trump has expressed a desire to end the conflict quickly, claiming that he could negotiate a peace deal within 24 hours, though he has provided few details about how this would be achieved. Critics suggest that Trump's approach would likely involve pressuring Ukraine to make territorial concessions to Russia, a stance that could alienate NATO allies and weaken Western resolve against Russian aggression. Additionally, Trump has consistently been more lenient toward Russia, often expressing admiration for Vladimir Putin and casting doubt on Russia's role in various global conflicts. This soft stance could shift U.S. policy away from the robust support that the Biden administration has provided to Ukraine. Trump's approach to China is expected to remain highly adversarial. In his first term, Trump launched a trade war with China, imposing tariffs on Chinese goods and accusing Beijing of unfair trade practices. In 2024, he has promised to implement even more aggressive economic policies, including revoking China's most favored nation trading status and considering a universal 10% tariff on all U.S. imports, which could affect global supply chains and exacerbate economic tensions. Trump has also positioned China as the primary geopolitical competitor to the United States, both economically and militarily. His administration could focus on reducing U.S. reliance on Chinese technology and supply chains, while increasing military presence in the Indo-Pacific to counter China's growing influence. Trump's Middle East policy during his first term was marked by his decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal, citing its failure to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions. If re-elected, Trump is expected to maintain a hardline stance on Iran, possibly reimposing sanctions and seeking to renegotiate a more stringent nuclear agreement. This could lead to further tensions in the region, as well as increased military engagement if diplomatic efforts falter. In contrast, Trump had success in the region with the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states. A second Trump administration could continue to build on these diplomatic achievements, furthering Israel's diplomatic integration into the region. Trump has consistently expressed skepticism about climate change, and he would likely continue his rollback of climate regulations if re-elected. In his first term, Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, arguing that it disadvantaged American workers and undermined U.S. sovereignty. He has promised to take similar actions in a second term, favoring fossil fuel production over green energy initiatives and prioritizing economic growth over environmental concerns. Trump's economic foreign policy would continue to focus on renegotiating trade deals, imposing tariffs, and prioritizing U.S. industries. His withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and his renegotiation of NAFTA into the USMCA were major milestones of his first term. In 2024, Trump is expected to push for more stringent trade deals that protect U.S. manufacturing and reduce trade deficits, especially with China. Trump has consistently framed his foreign policy as a fight against globalism, promoting policies that center on U.S. sovereignty and economic independence. His America First agenda seeks to decouple the U.S. from multilateral obligations that he believes do not serve American interests. Trump's 2024 foreign policy would likely continue his first-term approach, characterized by economic nationalism, a focus on bilateral relationships over multilateral alliances, and a more isolationist stance on global governance. While his policies could strengthen U.S. economic independence, they may also risk alienating key allies and intensifying global tensions, particularly with adversaries like China and Iran. Immigration is a hot-button issue in this election, with Trump doubling down on his call for stricter border security and tougher immigration laws. Harris, while supporting secure borders, advocates for comprehensive immigration reform that includes a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. While Trump doubles down on his America First approach, focusing on stricter border enforcement and reduced immigration, Harris emphasizes a more comprehensive and humane immigration reform, seeking to balance security with the protection of immigrant rights. His immigration plan for 2024 largely mirrors his policies from his first term, but with intensified measures aimed at curbing both legal and illegal immigration. Central to his platform are actions designed to tighten border security and reduce the number of immigrants entering the U.S. Trump has consistently advocated for building a stronger border wall and increasing the use of technology and personnel to secure the southern border. He has also emphasized policies to stop asylum abuses, accusing migrants of using asylum claims as a loophole to gain entry to the U.S. One of Trump's major proposals is the termination of protection programs like deferred action for childhood arrivals and temporary protected status, which provide temporary legal status to undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children and those fleeing crisis in their home countries. He attempted to end these programs during his first term, but faced legal obstacles. In 2024, Trump promises to fully end these protections, potentially leading to the deportation of hundreds of thousands of people currently benefiting from these programs. Trump has also vowed to suspend the refugee resettlement program, a move that could drastically reduce the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. to zero, building on his first-term reductions of refugee admissions to historic lows. Furthermore, Trump proposes invoking the Alien Enemies Act to deport known or suspected gang members and drug cartel associates without due process. To further restrict immigration, Trump has suggested a universal 10% tariff on U.S. imports, including those from countries that do not comply with U.S. immigration laws. He also supports revoking China's most favored nation trade status to combat illegal immigration and its economy. Kamala Harris, in contrast, approaches immigration from a more humanitarian perspective, advocating for comprehensive reform that addresses the root causes of migration while enhancing border security. Harris's experience as vice president during the Biden administration has shaped her immigration strategy, focusing on balancing enforcement with immigration protections. Harris supports pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, especially those protected under DACA and TPS. Her plan seeks to reform the immigration system by expanding legal immigration opportunities and offering undocumented residents who meet certain criteria the chance to earn legal status. Harris is expected to continue advocating for legislation like the DREAM Act, which would grant citizenship to DACA recipients and other undocumented immigrants who have lived in the U.S. for years. While Trump prioritizes physical barriers like walls, Harris emphasizes technological and logistical improvements at the border. Her approach includes increasing resources for border management, such as more immigration judges to reduce backlogs and fairer asylum procedures. Under the Biden-Harris administration, there has been an emphasis on addressing the root causes of migration from Central America, such as poverty and violence. Harris would likely continue these efforts by investing in regional partnerships and aid. Harris also supports a more measured approach to asylum seekers. While Trump has called for suspending refugee and asylum programs, Harris plans to expand these pathways, ensuring that those fleeing persecution can seek protection in the U.S. Harris's immigration policy highlights the need for reform that recognizes the dignity and contributions of immigrants, as well as the enforcement of border laws to maintain national security. The two candidates' immigration policies reflect broader differences in ideology. Trump's proposals focus on restriction and enforcement, aiming to sharply reduce immigration levels and prioritize American sovereignty and security over international humanitarian obligations. His policy is grounded in the belief that current immigration levels harm the U.S. economy and national security. Harris, on the other hand, offers a more inclusive and reform-oriented approach. Her plan aims to fix a broken immigration system through legal reform, providing pathways to citizenship and enhancing protections for asylum seekers. While she also acknowledges the need for border security, Harris believes it can be achieved through smarter management rather than solely through physical barriers or mass deportations. The candidates present stark contrasts on social and cultural issues. Harris supports LGBTQ+ rights, reproductive freedom, and racial equality, while Trump has aligned with more conservative stances, opposing abortion rights, advocating for parental control in education, and emphasizing law and order. Their platforms reflect the broader ideological differences between the Republican and Democratic parties, touching on healthcare, LGBTQ+ rights, criminal justice, and education. Trump's social policies are rooted in a conservative, traditionalist framework, often emphasizing deregulation, personal responsibility, and religious freedom. Harris, by contrast, advocates for progressive policies that focus on equity, inclusivity, and social justice, emphasizing expanding access to healthcare, education, and civil rights protections. Trump's social policies in 2024 continue to reflect his conservative views, prioritizing deregulation, reduced government intervention, and traditional values. Central to his platform are policies that resonate with religious and conservative voters, particularly on issues like LGBTQ+ rights and abortion. Trump's stance on abortion aligns with the conservative wing of the Republican Party. He played a crucial role in appointing 3 Supreme Court justices who contributed to the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. For 2024, Trump's social policy involves restricting access to abortion on the federal level by supporting states that implement stricter abortion bans. He has signaled openness to signing a national abortion ban, likely imposing restrictions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Trump has taken a hardline stance against expanding LGBTQ+ rights. He has promised to ban gender-affirming surgeries for minors and has advocated for legislation that would restrict transgender athletes from participating in sports that align with their gender identity. Trump has also promised to reinstate the transgender military ban, which he implemented during his first term. His approach reflects the traditional views of many conservative voters who argue against what they see as the progressive overreach on issues of gender and sexuality. Trump's social policies emphasize religious freedom as a core component of education. He advocates for school choice programs, allowing parents to use public funds, such as vouchers, to send their children to private or religious schools. His education policy includes expanding homeschooling options and encouraging religious teachings in schools. Trump has also called for eliminating federal guidelines that mandate LGBTQ+ inclusivity in schools, arguing that local communities should have more control over their curriculums. Trump's policy focuses on a law and order approach to criminal justice. He has promised to crack down on urban crime, including creating tent cities to relocate homeless individuals from urban areas. Trump is also in favor of expanding police funding and reducing oversight of law enforcement agencies, emphasizing the need to empower police to combat crime effectively. He argues that liberal policies on policing have contributed to a rise in crime and homelessness, particularly in cities governed by Democrats. Kamala Harris's social policy agenda for 2024 is rooted in equity and inclusivity, focusing on expanding civil rights, protecting access to reproductive health care, and addressing systemic inequalities in education and criminal justice. Harris builds on her vice president work, including initiatives championed by the Biden administration. In stark contrast to Trump, Harris is a fierce advocate for reproductive rights. She has vowed to restore the protections provided by Roe v. Wade by working with Congress to codify the right to abortion at the federal level. Harris supports expanding access to contraceptives and other reproductive health care services, particularly for low-income women and women of color. Harris also advocates expanding Medicaid coverage to ensure women can access maternity care and other essential health services. Harris has long advocated for LGBTQ+ rights, and her 2024 platform includes expanding civil rights protections for LGBTQ+ individuals. She supports the Equality Act, which would provide comprehensive anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ+ people in areas like housing, employment, and public accommodations. Harris is also a vocal supporter of gender-affirming care for transgender individuals, opposing the restrictive measures championed by Trump. A stance on LGBTQ+ rights reflects a broader commitment to civil liberties and social justice. Harris's social policies place a strong emphasis on education equity. She supports increasing federal funding for public schools, particularly in underserved communities, and expanding access to early childhood education. Harris advocates for free community college and debt relief for student loans to make higher education more accessible. Her education policy also addresses racial disparities in school funding and outcomes. In addition, Harris supports maintaining federal guidelines that ensure inclusive curriculums that reflect the diversity of the American population, including LGBTQ+ issues and history. She advocates for strengthening Title IX protections to ensure that all students, regardless of gender identity, are treated fairly in school settings. On criminal justice, Harris has consistently advocated for reform. Her platform includes ending cash bail, reducing mandatory minimum sentences, and investing in diversion programs to reduce incarceration rates, especially for non-violent offenders. Harris has called for expanding mental health services and addiction treatment programs as alternatives to incarceration. She also supports reforms to address systemic racism within the criminal justice system, including increased oversight of law enforcement agencies and policies that promote police accountability. The stark contrasts between Trump's and Harris's social policies reflect the broader ideological divide between Republicans and Democrats in 2024. Trump's agenda focuses on rolling back progressive gains in areas like reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ protections, and criminal justice reform, emphasizing traditional values, deregulation, and increased law enforcement. Harris, by contrast, prioritizes expanding civil rights, addressing systemic inequalities, and promoting access to education and healthcare. Their policies offer voters to very different visions for future social issues in the United States. Again, the electoral map focuses on battleground states that will likely determine the outcome. States like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which played pivotal roles in past elections, are hotly contested again. Additionally, states like Arizona and Georgia, which swung Democratic in 2020, remain in play for both parties. Early polling indicates a close race in these states, with Trump leading in some and Harris holding narrow leads in others. Suburban voters, particularly women, are seen as a key demographic in deciding the election's outcome, especially in states like Michigan and Georgia, where both parties have been focusing significant resources. Voter turnout is expected to be a significant factor in the election, with both parties focusing on get-out-the-vote campaigns. Early voting and absentee voting have become more important following the COVID-19 pandemic, with both campaigns encouraging their supporters to take advantage of these options. Democrats have focused on voter registration efforts, particularly among young voters and minority groups, while Republicans have targeted rural and older voters, emphasizing election integrity and in-person voting. Enthusiasm remains high on both sides. Trump continues to command loyalty from his base, but Harris has been working to energize the Democratic base, particularly among younger voters and progressives who may feel disillusioned with the Biden administration's moderate approach to some key issues. The first presidential debate in September set the tone for the election season, with both Harris and Trump using the stage to differentiate themselves on various policy issues. Harris's performance was seen as competent and steady, focusing on policy specifics, while Trump delivered a more aggressive, populist message to rally his base. The media has been sharply divided in its coverage, with liberal outlets largely critical of Trump and conservative outlets rallying behind him. Meanwhile, independent and moderate media have tried to emphasize the policy contrasts between the candidates without veering into sensationalism. The role of social media and misinformation has continued to be a concern, with both campaigns actively using platforms like X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok to reach voters. As of September 2024, the US presidential election remains intensely competitive, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump vying for key demographics and critical battleground states. The election's outcome will hinge on factors such as voter turnout, the candidates' ability to appeal to undecided voters, and how they navigate pressing issues like the economy, healthcare, and immigration. With only weeks left until Election Day, both campaigns are ramping up efforts to secure victory in what could be one of the closest elections in modern history. Ultimately, The choice between Trump's conservative vision and Harris's progressive agenda reflects more profound questions about how Americans want the country to move, particularly on social issues that impact the daily lives of millions. As the election nears, these differences will likely continue to shape public discourse and voter preferences, offering two distinct paths forward for the nation.